And we're rolling, if that's good for you.
Great. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So, first of all, who are you?
My name is Sean Murphy. I'm an artist and writer, mostly known for Batman. I work in comics exclusively. I try to do my own independent stuff on the side as well, but I'm mostly known for doing Batman and maybe Superman in a few years.
Okay, great. So, within your work, there's titles like Punk Rock Jesus, Tokyo Ghost,
Yeah.
the White Knight Saga, of course. I think your work is marked by a desire to attack codes and norms pretty heads-on, like in a very punk way, very revolutionary. Would you agree?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I forget the word we have in America for it. It's oh man, if I had more sleep, I think I would know what the word is. But thank you for recognizing that. Yeah.
So I think one of
Iconoclastic, sorry. Iconoclastic.
yeah, it's in France here we have the same word too, and it's
Okay.
I think it's pretty accurate for your work. So with your most recent work and maybe the most famous one, so the White Knight Saga, of course. You took the gamble to swap the roles between the Joker and Batman. It was maybe the main idea, I would say, of the saga.
Yeah.
And it's of course a great idea, but it's not the same thing having a great idea and making a good story. So how did you manage to go past the simple gimmick
Right.
aspect of the thing
Yeah.
and to go deeper into the story, the narrative? Was it hard for
Yeah,
you?
it's funny. It's a simple pitch. What if the Joker was good and Batman was bad? What if Joker was able to beat Batman by pointing out how problematic it was? Which is very obvious. If you live in Gotham and you can't get to work because Batman destroyed your bridge, I imagine that the support for Batman would dry up pretty quickly. But I've never seen a story really address that. So I wanted to tackle that and give a plausible reason why the Joker would get off on his crimes. Maybe there was police corruption. Maybe he was able to find a way to, expunge his case or whatever it is. So it was interesting. It was challenging to try to find small ways to make it plausible, because the story begins with Batman in jail and Joker's free. And I think most readers read that and go, "Oh, this is crazy, and there's no way I'm going to buy into this." And as they start reading, they go, you know what? Joker has a lot of good points here, actually. I find myself siding with him. I still like Batman. I still celebrate him, but there's some stuff that he does which everyone knows, but no one ever really wants to talk about, because it's like, slaughtering your sacred cows, so to speak. So I think the challenge was to just put in enough plausible reasons why that simple gimmick would work. And hopefully by the end of the book, people were convinced, Joker's right, Batman's right too, and it's obviously not a real city, it's just fiction, but it's fun to play with,
Okay, and in the way you managed to create this whole universe, it reminds a lot, and a lot of readers too, about what Frank Miller did with the Dark Knight Returns and his own saga. And so it's kind of a big word to say, but a lot of people say that the White Knight is kind of the new Frank Miller's universe. Would you agree with that?
I'm very flattered.
It must be flattered.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Frank Miller. I know him a little bit and had dinner with him a few times. I'd like to think, I don't think there'll ever be another Frank Miller in some ways. To do what he did in the mid-1980s when he was reinventing Batman to make him darker. I mean, if Frank Miller was my age, maybe this is how he would go about it. In the post-Trump era, to talk about Gotham and politics and things like that. Maybe this would be his version. It's a massive compliment to me, so thank you.
You're welcome. And so I'm guessing it was like a bit of a gamble, like for the audience too. The idea of having the Batman, who is of course a very beloved character, turning into the bad guy. Were you a bit afraid maybe before the release of the book?
Yeah, it's funny. After the book came out, a friend of mine who works at DC, he's a suit. He's very well paid. He said, if you had pitched your idea to me, I would have said no, because you made Batman the bad guy. But obviously, that was the wrong decision, because the book sold very well, and he said that you managed to pull it off, because he was very skeptical of the idea, and when he actually read it, he understood. Oh, okay, he thought it was clever. So yeah, I did worry about turning people's favorite character into the bad guy, but I also wanted to be clear in the book that he's just flawed. He's been doing this a long time. He's single vision minded, and that's what makes him human. You know, he's not perfect. He makes mistakes, and it's a miracle he hasn't killed anybody accidentally. Yeah, and I think it's just fun. I mean, the book obviously loves Batman, even though it's criticizing him. I think it does it with love and respect.
Yeah, because you love Batman, obviously.
Of course, yeah, yeah. And at the end, that's sort of the moral of the story is it's not right that it's not a perfect solution, but Gotham isn't a perfect city. So this is the uneasy truth we have with vigilantism, you know, so it sort of works for Gotham.
Yeah, okay.
But I imagine Batman would come and go as he's needed and not just always be there punching criminals, you know.
Okay, and we see for a few years now, but it started maybe a long time ago. But those years, it's starting to become even more a trend to point out the flaws of the heroes, like we see in movies, series.
Right.
A lot of new archetypes and new way to focus on the bad side of the superhero.
Right.
How do you feel like?
Yeah, you're right. There's a trend where you want to humanize villains and show that they have a reason for what they do. And I understand that as a writer, it makes the villain more compelling. But I think it goes too far when you try to redeem every villain. I think stories still need an antagonist. If Marvel Comics, for example, because I don't work for them, takes all their villains and tries to give them heart-wrenching, real reasons why they are bad, it sort of takes away, then there's no bad guys anymore, and that sucks. You know, like it's good to have villains that we condemn for being bad. That's part of what storytelling is. So yeah, I would say to companies, you need to be careful with how many villains you redeem. It's okay to just let them be bad sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the main reason why it worked so well with White Knight, the White Knight saga, is that we already know that Batman is kind of a tricky character. Like you couldn't just do the same thing with every other DC character, like turning Lex Luthor into the good and Superman into the bad, etc.
Right.
Like it's not a recipe that would work for every.
That's fair. Yeah.
Okay, so we spoke earlier about Frank Miller's influence and stuff. Do you think there is maybe some other version of Batman in yours? Like, who would be your, let's say, top 3 best Batman of all time that you may have inspired you?
The 3 best Batmans for me of all time.
It's hard, I know.
Yeah. Well, the big one is Kevin Conroy, who did the voice of Batman in the animated series. For me, the TV show from 1992 is the Bible of Batman. I try to point that out in an interview that my book is really an extension of what Paul Dini and Bruce Timm did in Kevin Conroy. Laying out the humanity of Batman, how much he sort of tries to care for the villains even though he's opposed to them. His forgiveness, his empathy, I think that show does it really well. So that would be 1, I'd say Kevin Conroy. 2 would be, it's a cop-out, but Michael Keaton as Batman in 1989. I think even though he didn't have a six-pack and he wasn't Christian Bale, he did play Bruce Wayne with some dark humor, which I don't think any actors managed to beat ever since. And then the 3rd one would be, I guess Frank Miller's Batman. Yeah, just the getting really old, too old for it, a little bit wrinkly, hurting your back, but not giving up. I was really impressed by that take as well.
Okay, great. So in the saga, so you first started with the main idea, so that the switch between the 2 characters. Then with Curse of the White Knight, you explore a bit of the past and the curse that may, obviously,
Right.
it's the name of the title. And in the last book of the trilogy, so it's more about, well, it's beyond White Knight. So it's I feel like there's kind of a narrative circle, like past, beyond, present, future. Is it intended, or did it happen like?
Naturally? The first one I designed to be a political thriller. The second one was a historical thriller. The third was a futuristic thriller in a way. And they're very different books. Like I feel like I sort of jumped from genre to genre, but that was kind of the fun of it too. If I had known the first volume was going to do so well, I probably would have planned it out differently. But I got to the end of it, and it was clear they wanted a sequel. So I was starting to think, how much more can I unhinge Bruce Wayne? And I thought, what if I made him never a Wayne at all? And his fortune really didn't belong to him, and sort of played with that. and that was the riskiest of the three, I think. People probably would review volume 1 and 3 the highest, but 2 is the one where, actually I think it does pretty well in France, where people are very interested in history. So I find that Curse of the White Knight does better in your culture than in others, which is interesting. I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
It's great, thank you. And so with what I think is very interesting too with this saga is that when you look all over it, there is not so much action. Like, it's not about battle, it's not about fights, like punch against punches.
Right.
It's like you said, it was more like a political thriller.
Yeah.
And it's more a jump into the psychology and the depth of the character. And I think it's pretty, well, I mean, pretty bold to go in this way.
Yeah.
Was it like?
Yeah, I think some of the action is obvious: car chases, punching, fist fights, and I think, especially to an American audience, you need to have some pretty fun punching action every issue. But I find that there's a lot better action in moving the chess pieces, so to speak, moving characters around and having them opposed and having great dialogue. I think great dialogue works better in movies, where you can have a courtroom drama be really enthralling in a movie, but a courtroom drama in a comic doesn't really work. As great as your dialogue is, people want to see a car chase. So finding the happy medium between trying to be high art about it and address political things and try to be subtle, versus it's a WrestleMania show where it's a bunch of cars and people punching and shooting at each other. So it's kind of an interesting balance, you know?
Okay, great. Circling back to, well, Punk Rock Jesus, so it's
Sure.
maybe obviously my favorite.
Yeah,
favorite
with
book
those
of
shoes,
yours.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So there's a point I think is very interesting, and I love when authors do that, and you did it in it. So it's when the author proposed a track list of music to listen while reading.
Right.
And so I was wondering if music plays a particular role when you're creating stories. Was
Yeah.
it only about Punk Rock Jesus, or do you
Yeah.
also is it also important for the rest of your work?
So probably more important for Punk Rock Jesus, because as you know, punk has that energy, and that you're unsettled and dissatisfied with society. You're usually young, you're brash, everything's black and white, and there's something beautiful about that pure anger and that anxiety, and it's just part of growing. And eventually, people usually grow out of punk rock. Even people who play punk usually grow out of it. And it's not to set it aside or say it isn't valid. It's just punk is meant for young people who are angry for a reason. So I think having something like a playlist for Punk Rock Jesus, it's a political book. Punk's a political message. It makes a lot of sense. Trying to think of a book you would do based off of Pink Floyd, and I just don't know if it would work the same way, you know? Like doing Batman, when I was writing Azrael, I would play a lot of synthwave music. So a lot of like music, people listen to it while they're playing video games. There's no lyrics, and I would imagine him on it with his sword while there's this epic synthesizer mix behind him, like very 1980s John Carpenter. And so I thought it was cool, but there's nothing about that really influenced the story. It just kept me energized while I was writing. Whereas listening to punk or Punk Rock Jesus, the message is very direct.
Okay, yeah, it makes totally sense. And so again, in Punk Rock Jesus, so it's a very interesting book, and it's kind of it may be maybe not hard to read, but there is a lot of very complicated issues addressed. Like even for the readers, like he has to question himself. And so obviously you already talk a lot about this book in previous interviews, but it was, I believe, a book very personal for you too.
Yeah, thank you. It was. I think I needed to vent about, I was brought up Catholic. In the 2000s, there was this big article in the Boston Globe that exposed priests molesting children and stuff like that. And I knew one of those priests. He didn't molest me or anything like that, but I remember him being around. And I read an article that said if you went to this school in 1986 or 1987, there's a good chance that you were molested. And there were only 60 kids in that school, and luckily he didn't come after me, but I remember him. And that's not why I lost my religion, but you know, seeing that corruption doesn't help. So I think having all that anger and resentment and annoyance with people, why they buy into a system that isn't always helpful. I have a lot of readers who are still Christian, and I don't want to fight with anybody. I'm happy if religion helps inform your good decisions, but when religion gets in the way of women's rights or gay rights or science, that's when I have a problem with it. So with Punk Rock Jesus, when I started the book, I went out with an axe to grind. I think I was very angry. And as I was doing each issue, I would go to conventions and I would meet readers who really liked the first 3 issues, but they were also religious. And halfway through, I thought, oh, man, I really like these people. I don't want to just keep bashing them with my angry, militant atheist beliefs. So halfway through the book, I started to make characters who were likable, who were still religious. Like there's a way to be religious that isn't antagonistic and, you know, harmful to others. So I'm glad that I met those readers, and it made me want to reevaluate what I was doing to soften the ending a bit. I mean, there's still the hardcore characters at the ending. There's still cool characters that happen to be religious, and there are the crazy religious characters. Yeah, it's funny. I'm very proud of the book. I haven't read it for a long time, but I'm sure if I read it now, I could do it a little bit better and make it more paced out a lot better. But for me, I think of it as a punk rock song, which starts quick, it goes hard, and it just ends very abruptly. And I think that's sort of the plot of Punk Rock Jesus.
Yeah, and that's completely punk too. Like,
yeah.
And so another thing I think is very interesting about this book is that you decided to mix very theme and genres that are usually not very mixed. Like it's a kind of maybe sci-fi cyberpunk
sure.
world,
yeah.
But there is also religion, and like when you look at I don't know, Blade Runner or any very high cyberpunk fiction, there is no religion, and it's mainly one of the spirituality is almost all the time one of the things that's out of this world, and you choose on the contrary to mix those and to confront them to show how they were compatible or not.
Yeah, it's interesting in things like Blade Runner or the book. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Religion doesn't seem to be there anymore, but people still worship people who are able to afford animals. It's like it's shifted. It's not a spiritual thing about what happens after you die, but there is the reverence of religion in sci-fi gets shifted to other things. Like they worship technology now, or they worship something that they can't have, or they worship water, whatever it is. It's interesting. I agree with what you said. I'm just sort of thinking out loud with how sci-fi tends to treat religious culture. Yeah, I was definitely looking at a lot of Blade Runner. I mean, I'm a sucker for the visuals for Blade Runner, period. I mean, who isn't? Yeah, every time I think I get burned out on drawing science fiction, whether it's The Wake or Tokyo Ghost, I keep thinking, I'm done with sci-fi forever. Enough of these flying cars and laser beams. And then I'll do a grounded book like Batman and Gotham, and then I'm thinking, I kind of want to do sci-fi again. So for Volume 3, I thought, let's do some more Blade Runner. I just can't seem to escape it. Excuse me.
No problem. And so you just mentioned Tokyo Ghost, and that's a perfect transition because it's another series I really love, and I think is kind of maybe not complementary with Punk Rock Jesus, but I like to think there is like a continuity between them. Like you did what you had to do with Punk Rock Jesus, and now you have maybe another target or another main enemy, I would say. With Tokyo Ghost, it's pretty clear as that it's capitalism and the culture of pleasure, etc. Yeah. So how do you feel about this?
I got very lucky. Rick Remender wrote that, and he's a punk rocker, like more punk than I am, but he very much wears his punk rock on his sleeve. And I think that book was a reaction to Donald Trump in a lot of ways. I didn't know that it would be so much in my brand. Like you said, it feels like an extension of Punk Rock Jesus, because big guy in a motorcycle, doesn't talk a lot. I never really thought of it that way, but that's a good point that you made. It does. It looks like I planned it, but I didn't. When we started Tokyo Ghost, it was supposed to be a samurai story that took place in Japan, and Rick and I talked, and we said, I think it needs to be something else. I think it needs flying cars and laser beams. So we decided to go more cyberpunk with it. And that year, I mean, there's so many image books that were sci-fi. I almost wish that we had not gone that way, because everyone was doing sci-fi, Like, I'm wondering what the version of Tokyo Ghost would be if it was just taking place in historical Japan. Obviously, it wouldn't be about technology. It would be a very different book.
Well, and we see, like today, so 2023, cyberpunk imagery and genre has pretty much took over. Like there had been the remake of Blade Runner, obviously, a lot of series, a lot of books, even in video games like Cyberpunk 2077. But when you were doing all those stories, it wasn't it wasn't as popular maybe as today. So how do you feel about seeing this genre? So I might say you mastered, or at least you know very much, become this trendy and this popular, well known.
It's I don't know. It's funny. Shows keep trying to redo Blade Runner, in a way. You know, even Star Wars with this Mandalorian episode that came out, it was clearly trying to do Blade Runner. It's amazing because Blade Runner was 1981 and it still manages to hold up. One of the things that when we do sci-fi, I'll tell the colorist, I don't want it to be a bunch of different colors like Blade Runner. I think when people try to do Blade Runner, it can be very there's too much going on paper. So what I said to my colorist was, I know I drew Blade Runner in black and white, but I want you to color it limited palette. So just use orange and blue. Don't go full rainbow like Blade Runner, because when comics try to do that, I don't think it works. I think it's better to go simple and have more of just to have a simple palette rather than go full rainbow. I mean, the cyberpunk genre sort of, I don't know if it ever really went away. It's been with us since the 70s, I guess. I'm not really sure. But yeah, with games like Cyberpunk 2077, I wonder how long cyberpunk is going to stay valid as a genre. Or maybe as we keep excelling in technology with AI, we'll just merge with our cyberpunk. Eventually, we're going to live cyberpunk. I mean, even going through the airport, face scans, fingerprints, it's very cyberpunk already, you know. Electric cigarettes, that was part of Blade Runner as well. So I guess we're kind of there. Maybe it'll never go away.
And I think one of the reasons why this specific genre took over or had maybe a rebirth, even though, as you said, it never went really anywhere, it's because the Japanese comic books or mangas completely took over the world, like in these past decades, and they have a very long history of cyberpunk with Akira, Gun, etc. And I was wondering, how do you position yourself, and how do you see this whole new, well, not new, but this whole literature?
It's a very interesting question. In the West, we let manga take over. In my country, we have stores like Walmart, Target, big stores where you can get big bags of peanut butter and bread or whatever. And they sell manga. We only sell comic books in specialty shops to a limited customer base. If we want to compete with manga, we're going to have to get into Walmart and Target. But they're building their shelves tankobon size. So they're used to clean books, black and white, very clear spines. They don't do different sizes and stuff like we do in the West. And that's what's winning. And people who want to read about Batman are often overwhelmed by what they see. Whereas if you want to get into Trigun, you just start with Volume 1. It's very easy. And in many ways, we lost the battle to tankobon. But I feel like it's not too late for comics to maybe start printing in black and white, shrinking it down so it fits on those shelves. I think there's going to be some hard decisions to be made, but I don't know if it's competing anymore. I think manga's won. It's just a matter of can Western comics adapt. And in Europe, it's interesting because you do the really large, hardcover, really beautiful, these trophies almost. And I know that a lot of Europeans are also reading smaller versions printed on cheaper paper so you can take it to the beach. So I'm curious, people your age from France, do they prefer the nice hardcover 48-page editions on their shelf, or do they prefer the less high quality where they can take it with them? And furthermore, what do you think about digital? Are you okay reading it on a reader? The fact that manga is not colored, it doesn't seem to bother you. Like, that's some really interesting questions that we in the West should be asking, and maybe we're not doing a good job sometimes, because we don't want to lose you as readers either, you know?
Well, and in a more maybe artistic way, I think there is a lot of proximity between the way stories are told in mangas and the way you told your stories in the rhythm, and even like in the art style. So it's a very broad point, but with a lot of edges, and even the black and white work. Like it's maybe one of your main characteristics is like your art is exceptional in black and white as well as in color, but for myself, I was seduced by your black and white
Oh,
first.
thank you. Yeah.
And so
That's the best compliment. It's funny, in America, they just don't, it has to be colored. And in France, half of my sales are of Punk Rock Jesus and Batman, I think, are in France. And half of those sales are black and white. Even when I'm working on Zorro now, and we're going to do a crowdfunding, and we're going to have a black and white version, and we're going to charge more for it because it's seen as the artiste version. But yeah, I really love how French people are fine without things being colored. Part of me is, I'm half French, half Irish, I think, so maybe that's why the noir speaks to me so much.
Okay. And so, speaking about your inspiration and well, where you come from,
Sure.
Obviously here in France we have a very long history and tradition of comic book. Do you know any French, Belgian, European, but mainly of course French, Belgian author that may have inspired you, or you discovered later after you were?
Yeah, well, artistically, my biggest inspirations have been European, some South America, and Japan. So Italians would be Topi. Matteo Scalera is an artist now. He's very good. I wish I could trade styles with him. Hugo Pratt, of course, is one of yours. Or was he South America? I forget. Jorge Zafino was South America. I think he knew Hugo Pratt. Yeah, the French sensibilities, or the European sensibility, is to pull the camera back and to show the tiny character with the big forest, and really let the atmosphere set in as mood. And in America, we don't do that as much. We zoom in to do medium shots. We want to see the guy with the gun, walking through the doorway. And French people do as well, but they want to see a big panel of him walking into the building to set the mood first. If you can put the Eiffel Tower in the background with the glow on it, even better. But I find that Europeans are more interested in backgrounds, settings, and mood, whereas Americans are into medium shots and getting to the point of the story. Just slight cultural shifts. Obviously, I'm from a country that is based on France and England. But yeah, it's interesting, the small differences. But yeah, my artistic sensibilities very much come from here. If I had to describe what I'm trying to do very simply, it would be, I want to have the speed, lines, and the energy of manga. I want to have the backgrounds and the mood setting of France. And I want to have the passion of South America. But I want to do it on an American deadline, so faster. And as much as I admire a lot of European artists, they do 7 pages a month, whereas I try to do 7 pages a week. It's just a different schedule, and maybe Americans work too hard. But that's sort of been my goal, was to blend the best things I could find into an American schedule and just try to survive.
Okay, great. So you've mentioned previously the influence of Klaus Johnson on your drawing, and well, you got to work with him on the White Knight saga. And I'm always wondering how it feels for an author to work with the one.
Yeah.
Like, I believe for you it might be this one.
Klaus is a friend and like an uncle. Like I can't stress how close he and I are. And when I pitched this story, he was very interested. He never got to do his Indiana Jones. Like every artist wants to do a story where the Nazis are the bad guys, type of thing. Klaus is a German immigrant, and he has a lot of German guilt. And he was very interested in doing a story that talked about this stuff. And it was a hard one to write because it was just a one shot, and I've never written something that had to be so profound but so contained and have some fun comic book sci-fi elements as well. And to talk about the Jews, which I'm not Jewish, neither is Klaus. We really wanted to be careful about what we said. I had a few sensitivity readers look over it as well. But yeah, I think that might be one of the best reviewed books I've ever done. And annoyingly, I didn't draw it. But Klaus did a great job. And there's a few scenes too where he has some people doing experiments on Jewish people, and that must have been a hard day for him to draw some of that stuff. But hopefully he found it cathartic.
Great, thank you. When I was digging for preparing this interview, I saw like a few years ago, 5 years ago maybe, you went on Twitch with Jim Lee on his channel. And we see today that Twitch, who started as a video game streaming company, is starting to greet every day more and more artists, and including famous comics artists. So Jim Lee is maybe one of the first. Yeah. Is it something you might consider in the future, like drawing live just for the pleasure of the audience? Or?
I should. I tend to be private a lot, and I tend to stay off of social media. But yeah, I think it'll be unavoidable one day to do more performance art and to record it and have a stream where I can teach or connect with my audience. Even stuff like TikTok, my wife understands it a lot better than I do. But that is the way of the future. If I was starting my career over right now, I absolutely would have to do that stuff. But I think I'm just old enough where I might not need to, but maybe I'll still do it some way, I'm not really sure.
Okay, great. Well, the day you do, I'll be your first viewer. You can be just sure of that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I should make an attempt. You're not wrong.
Okay, I think we're almost done. So I will have for you my last question, and
Sure.
of course the hardest. If you were to recommend only 3 comics to our readers that you think everyone should read in their life, which would it be and why?
I'd say Maus is up there. Speaking of the Holocaust, that's the most famous, probably most celebrated comic book of all time, next to Watchmen. Obviously, Watchmen would be another good one. My other favorite is Calvin and Hobbes. Just the Sunday strip, the nostalgia, all that stuff. We were in Angoulême a few years ago, and they had an exhibit for Bill Watterson, and he had all of his drawings there. And they're very hard to. I think he donated his whole collection to someplace in America, a college. So there isn't a lot out there to see. So that was pretty amazing. Yeah, I guess the third one would be. Oh man. I'll plug my friend. So Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan did a book called Saga for Image. It's really great. It manages to talk about a lot of social issues like LGBT, feminism, but it's very subtle. It doesn't hit you over the head. I think it's done right and done well. And even somebody that approaches that work who is not aware of what feminism is or whatever, they won't realize they're reading something very progressive until it's too late and they're already sucked in, you know. Whereas a lot of my friends are very aggressive with their politics, and it doesn't always work that way. And I can speak from experience because I tried it with Punk Rock Jesus. Sometimes the hammer is not as helpful as the flower or the rose.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a very good way to end this interview. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure and
Yeah,
an
thank
honor.
you for the questions. Thanks for wearing those cool sneakers.
You're welcome.